bookstore, you type in servant leadership, it's huge. There are shelves and volumes on servant leadership. But no one really knows what it is. If you start researching what servant leadership is from 10 different people, you'll get 10 different answers. Well, in just a few minutes I have with you, we're going to talk a little bit about how Order of the Arrow is actually part of servant leadership. Matter of fact, Order of the Arrow is probably the best definition of servant leadership. So, when I say servant leadership, what words come to mind in the back? What comes to mind? This is the audience participation part of this. Servant leadership, what does it mean?
Service before self.
Putting others before yourself.
Awesome. Putting others before yourself. Thank you. What else?
Like when you volunteer to do it?
When you volunteer to do it. Thank you. You know, scouting's all about volunteers. It's free to enter. You got to pay to leave, right? Very good. What else?
Helping other people.
Helping other people. Exactly. They would agree. Now, keep those in mind as we go forward, because that's a lot about servant leadership. And when we talk servant leadership, you always have to hear the story of the father and the son who get up in the morning, and the son asks the father, well, what does it mean to be a servant leader? And the father says, well, I don't know. What do you think it means to be a servant leader? Well, to be a leader, the son says, you got to have a job. And the father says, well, maybe. And the son says, well, you got to have a place to go, like an office, to be a servant leader. Well, sometimes it helps. You don't have to. Oh, I know what it means. That means you got to have like a big building to go into and have a big chair. No. Sometimes it doesn't help. Well, you got to have people to do jobs. What do you mean? Well, you got to have people who follow you. Oh, you hit on part of it. You hit on part of it. A servant leader has someone who follows. Have people who follow them for reasons because they give back to others, as you three explained. You know, Ian or Goodman. This is kind of a fun project if you ever want to do it. Ian or Goodman, in some of his early writings, right after the order was founded in 1915, you start getting into the 20s, you start seeing writings from him that say, here's what a servant leader is. He actually talks about this. A servant leader is someone who's chosen as a leader because they were a servant themselves. Does that make sense to you? A little bit. All right, help me out just a little bit. Someone who's a servant leader, and that's what Ian or Goodman talks about. So that list we talk about giving back, volunteering, helping others. If you look at that story, thank you, Steve Sharp, wherever you are, for handing that out at the tables. Look at that story. There's a short story, and you may have to share a little bit. And I'm not reading this to you because I'm dumbing down your intelligence. I'm just doing that so we can look at everything in the right way. But it talks about on this one page about how each year, with thousands of meetings in the United States, a tradition takes place, and we recognize worthy members of their troops by electing them into the Order of the Arrow. The Order of the Arrow is sometimes called as our National Honor Society, and I start using that as well. Scouts are instructed to cast their ballot, and if you keep reading here, it talks about, and you've heard this before at ceremonies, there's nothing new here. We are the only organization in Scouting that does what to get members in? Who can be elected in the Order of the Arrow?
Boy Scouts.
Yeah. And who can elect them in? Members and non-members. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. So you stand out from others. But the point here is that in your troop, and upon seeing their friends elected and recognized with OA membership, they'll be inspired to adjust their own behavior. Remember that line, inspired to adjust their own behavior. And a positive consequence is more scout-like behavior. So when you start looking at this, what qualifications? As you go forward today, when I'm done and gone and I'm out of here, what qualifications, okay, help our organization attract servant leaders?
Scout law.
Scout law? That's a good one, obviously. Good point. What qualifications help our organization attract servant leaders? What day is it today? No, what do we do to attract leaders? What do we do?
Teach people about leadership.
Teach people about leadership. That's going to be attractive. What else? Yeah.
Leading by example.
Leading by example. What else do we give servant leaders in our organization that no other organization can give? There's no wrong answer.
Sadness.
Yeah. There you go. What else?
Appreciation.
Appreciation. Recognition, thank you very much. That's a big one. Here's one for you that I heard earlier today, actually, when we were talking about the presentations. We were going over your scenarios, and I listened in the back when it doesn't look like I'm listening, but I'm really listening. You start talking about how we give people leadership who have never had leadership experience before. Think about that for a minute. That's what attracts. Now, how do those qualifications relate to the characteristics we want? What kind of characteristics do you want in a ceremonial team? Yanni's not one of them. What are you looking for?
People who are dramatic.
Dramatic.
They like to perform.
They like to be in front. Yeah.
Creative.
Creative. Oh, you can't beat creative ceremonial people. You can't. You can't beat dramatic people. What else? What characteristics are you looking for? Yeah.
Charismatic.
Charismatic. Sure. Does charisma mean leadership necessarily? Not really. Not really. That's good. That's a good qualification that we're looking for. Cheerful. Yeah, exactly. We talk about cheerful service. That's important too. That's the characteristics we're looking for. But to be a servant leader, what Ian Goodman's talking about, what our founder's talking about, is how do you inspire others? And you talk about by example. So that's a good characteristic. Now, I'm going to ask you the $64 million question. Thinking about servant leadership. Thinking about giving to others. Thinking about leading by example. Thinking about putting value in others. And if you read a couple servant leadership books in organizations like ours, they talk about giving back to others. And somebody mentioned that at this table. But here's the question. And you can say this because you're not an egotistical group. I know that. Well, what made you stand out from other scouts? Why did you get elected? Why? It's okay to say it. Why? And the answer is not, well, I was the only one running. No. How did you get chosen? Why?
I like to get other people involved in different scout activities.
Sure. People will follow you that way. Get others involved. What else? Yeah.
I'm a funny person.
You're a funny person. That's great. We like funny. We love funny. Because people want to be around that. What else? Is your servant leader the type that just, oh, our troop stinks. We had a patrol leader council. We only had 2 of us show up. Would you follow that person? No, you wouldn't. That's what servant leadership's about. It's trying to get someone out there who says, all right, look, hey, funny. Hey, this is what we're going to do. Charismatic, this is what we're going to do. Here's a great project we got. Here's how I think we can do it. Aero Power 2014, August 17th. Impressed, aren't you? Yeah. It's coming up. Going awesome. We're doing great stuff. You want to be around that person. So what made you stand out? What made you stand out, I would guess, is that people have dealt with you before. And people know who you are. They know what you're about. That's servant leadership. So are you a servant leader? Each organization attracts servant leaders the same way. And other people saw in us characteristics they admired. Is our order, we call it an honor society. We have a membership filled with leaders. And what will come down to us is the effort and belief in each of our leadership abilities. Do you have servant leaders in your chapter? Correct answer is yes. I'll get you to the test. But you do. Now, if you look at the historic value, who are some servant leaders? Outside of scouting, shout me some examples. Jesus. Yeah. You know, we laugh, but it's the truth. Who else? Who else? Say it. What? Okay. I have another George for you. How about George Washington? Was he a servant leader? Yeah. Sure he was. He was a custodian. Who else? Abraham Lincoln. You know, I was reading since you brought up Lincoln, I got to tell the story. I get up early. I'm one of those guys that goes online newspapers. I read them all, like to see what's going on. And whether you like them or not, I worked, before I was in scouting, I spent about a year working in city government down in Minneapolis for Jesse Ventura. He was the mayor of Brooklyn Park at the time. So I got to spend a year working for Jesse. And he ran for governor. And he said, this story came up this morning. He ran for governor, and one of his advertisements said, there was a guy, 6'4", big tall guy, people wanted to follow him. He wrestled as a younger man. And in 1860, he became president of the United States. Abraham Lincoln. What servant leaders do you have out there? Abraham Lincoln's a good one. Absolutely. George Washington, some people would argue, was a custodian. Have you ever heard the term stewardship? I'm not talking to the grown-up kids, I'm talking to your hero here.
Yeah.
Have you, yes, you have. Stewardship means what? Seth is the man. Well, he is the man. He will be the man. And let me ask you, when you take this lodge, you become a custodian. What does that mean to you? I'll put you on the spot just because you're standing there and you're smiling and you look good, and I figure I'll just put you on the spot. Why?
Good-looking guy. I don't know, me, it's, taking the lodge to newer heights, Kyle took the great heights, these last 2 years, and, let's, take them higher than we can go, so push the limits.
Can he do that? Can he do that just by saying it? Can he do that by, hey, I want to do this, I want to do that. I think this is great, LLD's awesome, you're awesome, though you are. We're going to do this stuff. What does he need?
Actions.
Action, us, what else?
Stewards.
Stewards. Leave it better than you found it. Y'all talk about campsites, leaving it better than you found it, right? That's servant leadership. Servant leadership, remember the 3 examples we had earlier that we first got started? We talked about giving back. Now, what are some disadvantages? This is not in the syllabus, so we're going to go off into dark continent here. What are some of the disadvantages of servant leadership? What's that? Boundaries? Could be.
You might be a great leader, but people might not want to give you titles because they think that you're along with the people, and sometimes you think of leaders you think that are untouchable.
You think of leaders can be untouchable and high up, yeah. Sometimes you think that. Now, servant leadership would dictate to you, well, actually, they're not, because they're giving back so much and they're leading by example. Good call, though. I like that one. What else? What are some of the disadvantages, perceived, here I'll change it, perceived disadvantages of servant leadership? Go ahead.
Contradicting ideas between, because normally, when I think of a servant leader, I think of somebody who empowers others to step up and to be a leader. And if you're empowering others, then those others will feel like they can bring their ideas forward, and then people will start to clash.
How many times, that's a good one, how many times, if you think of servant leadership, you think about the examples we talked about, think about it in scouting, where let's say you have an SPL, or an OA Lodge chief, or heck, I'll even say den lead, someone who says, well, what do you want to do? What are your ideas? And they gather all these ideas in, and it creates conflict. You ever had that before? Somebody wants to go this way, somebody wants to go the other way. That's tough. That's one of the disadvantages or one of the criticisms of servant leadership. And what servant leadership dictates is, well, when you start empowering people who work with you, you can shed the titles that you talked about. You can shed some of those things. That's what Order of the Arrow is all about. And that's why they make it a small part of LLD, is because they really believe in the servant leadership. I do as well. How many organizations, scouting and non-scouting, have you walked into? How many troops, you talk about elections, how many troops have you walked into? Because I have. In the last month, how many troops have you walked into and you feel it? You can just cut it with a knife. I have. You walk in there, you're walking in on election night. You're thinking, this is great, we're going to have an election. This is awesome. And you drive and you do your thing and you walk into the troop and you just, man, is this a troop meeting or is this a court hearing? You have it. You really do. That's when your servant leadership comes into play. How can we help? Now, you're there for an election. You're there to get names and do the election thing. You're not there to solve the troops' issues since 1957. You're not going to handle that. But when you just say those words, that's servant leadership. That's even covered in LLD. How do we help? How do we help? Or if you walked into a troop, we'll do the opposite. You walk into a troop, you're going to do the election. Wow. Who's SPL? Walked into that too. Who's SPL? Do you have any patrol leaders? Who can I talk to? I'm here to do the election. Who do I talk to? That's way on the other side. So that's when you have to say the same thing. How do I help? How do I help? So the bottom line with LLD and why we bring that story to you in front of you and why we talk about servant leadership, that's who we are in the Order of the Arrow. We're custodians of that left for us to make it better. We are stewards of what we have. And you, yes you, go look in the mirror. Men's room's over there, ladies' room's over there. Go look in the mirror. Because you were elected into this order because someone followed you And I want to end with this when it talks about servant leadership. And those of you who are on camp staff, you've heard me say this before, and I'm going to say it again. I've said this to every camp staff I've had a chance to work with. Those are servant leaders, by the way. Much better than me. If you've been on a camp staff, that's servant leadership 101 and 201 and 301, 401, in the master's class, 501. You all have that kid. Maybe you have it in your troop. Maybe you got it in a pack you work with. Maybe you have it at a chapter event. Maybe you have it at a lock-in. You know the one kid, he's usually a little younger, the one that won't leave you alone. Why are you laughing? We all got it. I go up to everybody in this room and say, tell me his name. Tell me his name. You up? I want to tell you why. Yes. I want to tell you why I'm bringing that story up, because everybody laughs. You know, it's like if you're about on camp staff, it's that one first-year scout that won't leave you alone. Do you know why they don't leave you alone? Do you know why that Cub Scout doesn't leave you alone when you go in there and do an away event? Do you know why that Boy Scout doesn't leave you alone when you go do an election? Do you know why that kid at day camp, you volunteered because you needed service hours, so all right, I'll go help at day camp. The kid that won't leave you alone, you know why? I'll give you a little secret. This is worth your gas money driving to Valley City today. Your greatness to them. You are. I hate to tell you that, but it's the honest truth. They saw something in you that they want to be like. I know, people want to be like you. It scares you, doesn't it? Yeah, it does me too. But I'll tell you, that's servant leadership. They saw something in you. You know, how many times do I go meet with business people around the state, Minnesota, North Dakota, Montana? How many times I meet with people? They can't remember what they did last week. But they can sure remember, hey, my den leader was Mrs. So-and-so. She was awesome. Or if I talk to someone who may be a little younger, might be in their 30s, they say, hey, Camp Wilderness. You still got the fire tower? Or you got those volunteers I go meet with. I've been in scouting in years who still talk about the ranger was so-and-so. Why do we get attached to campsites, Steve Sharp? Why do we get attached to campsites in here? Because it's servant leadership. Guys, I leave you with this at LLD. When you start planning these elections, and John just did a great job talking about elections, when you start laying out Aero Power 2014, when you start laying out what we're doing at camp, you're being watched. And those three things we talked about when I got up here and started, three things you three brought up about characteristics, you got them. Leading others, volunteering, giving of yourself. People want to be around that stuff. So I'm glad they bring it up at LLD for a little bit. I'm glad they do. And thanks for your time. And thanks for you characters for standing in the back and not throwing stuff. So thank you.